The Flawless Consulting Fieldbook and Companion by Peter Block and 30 Flawless Consultants. Picture yourself in Mike's shoes for a moment. You're an internal consultant, and you've stumbled into what can only be described as a career minefield. On one side stands Susan Bromley, a senior vice president who makes ice look warm. She's humorless, laser-focused, and she's hatched a plan that makes your blood run cold. She wants to fire nearly her entire experienced sales team and replace them with minimum wage contractors. In her mind, it's financial genius. In yours, it's organizational suicide dressed up in a spreadsheet. Then there's Freddie Simmons, your boss. This guy keeps baseball bats in his office and insists on calling you Mikey. You desperately seek his guidance, his support, and what do you get? Vague wisdom that sounds like fortune cookie philosophy, and a clear message that Susan is, well, your headache to cure. So here you are, perfectly trapped. Push back against Susan, and you're labeled as difficult, unhelpful, maybe even unemployed. Go along with her plan, and you'll watch the company nosedive while your conscience screams at you. Run back to your boss for a lifeline, and you look like you can't handle the big leagues. This isn't just a workplace puzzle. This is the kind of soul-crushing dilemma that keeps you staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. It's that awful space between doing what's right and doing what's safe, between speaking truth to power and protecting your mortgage payment. These situations don't just happen in corner offices. They happen at dinner tables, in friendships, and anywhere humans try to help each other navigate the mess we call life. Navigating these impossible, beautifully messy human situations is exactly what the Flawless Consulting Fieldbook and Companion is all about. Peter Block wrote it alongside 30 battle-scarred colleagues who've spent decades in the trenches of organizational change. This isn't one of those paint-by-numbers business books stuffed with acronyms and tidy frameworks. Think of it more like sitting around a campfire listening to war stories from people who've been there, done that, and have the scars to prove it. Over the next 40 minutes, we're going on a journey through its most powerful lessons. Here's what I can promise you. By the time we're done, you'll understand something the world's most effective leaders, parents, and partners know in their bones. True influence has almost nothing to do with having brilliant answers, and everything to do with asking the kinds of questions that change how people see themselves. This isn't just about becoming a slicker consultant. It's about becoming a more effective, more human version of yourself. Let's kick things off with something surprising. The title, Flawless Consulting, is actually a beautiful paradox, and it's completely intentional. M.J. Wheatley, one of the contributors, captures this perfectly in a poem that opens the book. She writes about wanting to be flawless, perfecting her game, crafting masks to hide behind. But then one day, boom, she falls flat on her face. Sprawled out, no masks, no clever strategies, just her, naked in the dirt. And it's precisely in that moment of messy, imperfect humanity that real connection becomes possible. Here's the first big lesson. Chasing flawlessness is a trap that'll catch you every time. The desperate need to be the perfect expert, the one with all the answers, is just a mask we wear. And that mask blocks the very thing our work and our lives depend on, authentic human connection. Most of us learned that when we're in a position to help someone, whether we're managing a team, parenting a teenager, or advising a friend, our job is to deliver solutions. They have a problem. We have expertise. They ask, "What should I do?" And we, eager to prove our worth and feel useful, hand them an answer on a silver platter. But here's where Peter Block and his colleagues say we've got it all wrong. Think about it for a second. When a client asks for your advice, what are they really after? More often than not, they want validation, not innovation. They're hoping for a low-risk, low-cost, easy-to-swallow recommendation that confirms what they already believe. They want a magic key that'll start the car without them having to learn anything about what's under the hood. The most common request for help, Block says, starts with how do we get those people to, you can fill in the blank. How do we get the sales team to use the new software? How do we get employees to be more engaged? How do we get my teenager to clean his room? The hidden wish behind that question is control. It's a desire to fix a problem that's defined as being out there, with those people. It rarely includes the person asking for help as part of the equation. When we jump in with recommendations and action plans, we're playing along with this illusion. We're feeding the fantasy that change can happen without any fundamental shift in the person who's asking for help. So our brilliant reports get written, our thoughtful advice gets delivered, and then it sits on a shelf gathering dust. The change never materializes, because the problem wasn't a shortage of answers. The problem was a shortage of ownership. This brings us to the anxiety that lives at the heart of any real change. When you stop offering easy answers and start asking deeper questions, you're asking people to step into the unknown. And let's be honest, that's terrifying. Block points to philosopher Peter Kostenbaum, who identifies 4 fundamental fears that show up every time we face a genuine choice. The first is the fear of being a fool, the dread of looking naive, of speaking up and having people laugh at you. It's that sinking feeling that everyone else knows the rules to a game nobody taught you how to play. The second is the fear of being abandoned, the terror that if you take a stand, your peers and your boss will turn away. You'll become invisible, unrecognized. Your ideas will hit the floor with a thud. You'll speak, and crickets. The third is the fear of being assaulted. This is about being publicly attacked and discredited. The fear that your fatal flaw, the one you've worked overtime to conceal, will finally get exposed. You'll become the cautionary tale, the example of what not to do. And the fourth is the fear of being insane. The unsettling feeling that you're the only one who sees what you see. You sit in lifeless meetings filled with unspoken tensions, and afterward everyone talks about how productive it was. You feel like you're taking crazy pills. You start wondering, is it just me? These fears are real. They're inevitable. Our instinct is to manage them away, to find a strategy that dodges risk. But Block offers something radical. These fears aren't a problem to be solved. They're a sign you're alive. They're the natural, unavoidable experience of our own freedom. The consultant's job, the helper's job, isn't to make these fears disappear. It's to help the client own them and see that the hope for a different future lives precisely in the risk, not in avoiding it. So if giving answers is a trap and avoiding risk is a dead end, what's the way forward? This is where the book makes its most profound shift. It asks us to completely change our role, stop being an expert with answers, and become a partner with questions. Your value is no longer measured by how brilliant your advice is, but by the depth and compassion of the questions you ask. This isn't about asking for more data. The book draws a powerful distinction between different kinds of questions. There are discovery questions, the kind we all know and love. They're diagnostic, scientific. How many people are in the department? What are the steps in the process? They're useful for painting a picture of the external world, but they carry about as much emotional risk as ordering coffee. Then there are deepening questions. These are the questions of a therapist, a coach, a philosopher. Their purpose isn't to gather data, but to engage the person with themselves. They're designed to confront us, gently but firmly, with our own freedom and our own role in creating the problem. A great deepening question has three qualities. First, it's ambiguous. There's no single right answer. It invites inquiry, not problem-solving. Second, it's personal. It asks you to look at yourself and reveal something real. And third, it carries the weight of individual accountability. It communicates that we're each responsible for creating the situation we find ourselves in. Consider the power of questions like these. What has been your contribution to creating the difficulties you're now facing? What crossroads are you standing at right now in your work and in your life? What refusal have you been avoiding? Or what are the payoffs you're getting for operating the way you currently do? These questions are hard to answer. They're also hard to deflect. They bypass our intellectual defenses and go straight to the heart. They don't provide a solution. They create a space where the person can discover their own solution. This is the art of making the system fully known to itself. As consultant Jill Janov writes, the wisdom is already in the room, it's in the system. The consultant's job isn't to import wisdom from outside like some kind of knowledge delivery service. It's to create the conditions for the people inside to discover the wisdom they already possess. The goal isn't to connect the dots for them. It's to create a container where they can see the dots and connect them for themselves. This is the fundamental difference between diagnosis and discovery. Diagnosis is based on a medical model of finding what's sick. Discovery is about finding what's healthy, what's already working, and building on that. This brings us to one of the most practical and powerful shifts in thinking the book offers. When you begin an engagement, when you start a conversation about a problem, resist the temptation to ask, "What's wrong here?" Instead, as consultant Elizabeth McGrath suggests, start with a simple, disarming question. So, what's working here? At first, people might look at you like you've lost your mind. They're so used to conversations that start with complaints. But invariably, something positive occurs to them. And as they talk about what's working, the energy in the room begins to shift. You move from a conversation about how terrible everything is to a discussion about beacons of hope. It doesn't ignore the problems, but it reframes them. The question becomes, how can we make more of our work like the parts that are already working well? This approach taps into a holographic view of the world. If one small success can exist in one corner of the organization, it means success is possible everywhere. That one small glimmer of hope contains the DNA for the entire transformation. Of course, just because you've shifted your approach from answers to questions doesn't mean the journey will suddenly become smooth sailing. In fact, it's often the opposite. When you start asking real questions, you will inevitably run into resistance. This is where consultant Phil Grosnick offers some of the most useful wisdom in the entire book. Our traditional view is that resistance is an enemy to be overcome. We brace ourselves for it. We plan strategies to defeat it. But Grosnick argues we should see resistance not as an obstacle, but as an ally. Resistance, he says, is simply the indirect expression of a real concern. More importantly, it's a sign that the client is finally taking you seriously. If learning is the goal, then resistance will be your constant companion. So what do you do when you face it? When the client starts changing the subject, or questioning your methods, or giving you a dozen reasons why your suggestion won't work? The first step is to make what Grosnick calls a good faith response. Treat their reaction as legitimate. Give them a straight answer, with goodwill. For example, if they question your need to gather your own data, you might say, "I need to assess the situation for myself before I can promise that my expertise will have a real impact. It's the only way I can be sure I can truly help you." You offer one, maybe two, good faith responses. But if the resistance continues, it's a sign that the concern runs deeper. At this point, continuing to argue your case is like pushing against a locked door. It only increases the pressure. The next step is to stop talking about the content and start talking about the process. You simply name the resistant behavior you're observing. Groznyk tells a powerful story. He was giving feedback to a vice president named Ray, explaining that his abrasive behavior was the primary cause of low morale in his department. Ray became enraged. He stood up, leaned over his desk, and started shouting. Groznyk's response wasn't to defend his data or argue his point. He simply raised his hands and said calmly, "Ray, you're yelling at me." That simple act of naming the behavior changed the entire conversation. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. And it opened the door for Ray to finally express the real, underlying emotion. "It's not you," he yelled back. "It's those kids I have to work with. They come in here with their fancy degrees thinking they know so much." Suddenly they weren't talking about morale surveys anymore. They were talking about Ray feeling old, out of touch, threatened by a younger generation. They were finally having the right conversation. And only after Ray felt completely heard and understood could they begin to talk about what he might do differently. This leads us into the very heart of the consultant's journey, the world of emotion, the personal, the messy, unpredictable stuff of life that we're so often taught to leave at the office door. The book argues that this is a fatal mistake. Any real change is an emotional process. It depends on courage, vulnerability, and optimism. Our work is to create a space where these emotions can be brought into the room. To do this, we sometimes have to play the fool. Andrea Markowitz writes about the wisdom of Shakespeare's fools. The court fool had a special license to mock, to provoke, to speak truths that no one else dared. In the same way, the consultant, as an outsider, can often say things that insiders cannot. But there's a risk. The fool can also become the scapegoat, the person who gets blamed when the king doesn't like the message. And sometimes, in our desire to help, we can get drawn into the madness of the system itself. This is illustrated perfectly in another of Andrea's stories, the case of Priscilla and the red pen. Priscilla is a rigid, controlling manager. Her team of production assistants is frustrated and disempowered. The consultant, Andrea herself, is brought in to help. During a team meeting, one of the assistants, Carmen, finally voices a complaint. "It's not about the workload or the deadlines," she says, "and what really bugs me is that red pen." It turns out Priscilla uses a fat red pen to mark up all the mistakes on their work. To Priscilla, it's just a pen she likes. "My teachers always used red pens," she says, genuinely confused. But to her team, it's a weapon. Red is the color of anger, the color of blood. It's the pen of a teacher grading a student, not a manager collaborating with adults. The pen has become a sword. The consultant, seeing this as an opening, helps them negotiate a deal. Priscilla reluctantly agrees to use a green pen for 2 weeks. At the next meeting, the consultant asks how it's going. Silence, uncomfortable glances. It turns out Priscilla used the green pen for a few days, but then went right back to her beloved red one. "The green one was too skinny," she says. And here, the consultant makes a critical mistake. Instead of exploring the meaning behind Priscilla's resistance, she gets sucked into problem-solving mode. "Couldn't you have found a fatter green pen?" she asks. "How about if I give you the money for a green pen?" In that moment, she stopped being a neutral facilitator and took the assistants' side against their boss. She colluded with the team in defining Priscilla as the problem. She got caught in her own desire to fix things, her own frustration with this controlling manager, and in doing so, she lost her ability to help the system see itself. The real issue wasn't the pen. The pen was just a symbol for a deeper dynamic. Priscilla's need for control and her team's feeling of powerlessness. The consultant's hubris, her belief that she could orchestrate a solution, got in the way of the group's own potential for learning. It's a painful lesson, and one that every helper must learn. As Rosemarie Barbeau writes in a beautiful poem, "This is not your labor. We are the midwife, not the one giving birth. Our job is to support the process, to care deeply from an objective place, but to remember that the work, the struggle, the change ultimately belongs to the client." So how do we do this? How do we lead without controlling? How do we help without taking over? Sam McGill offers a powerful metaphor in his story, Leading from Behind, Talking with Sled Dogs. Imagine being asked to lead a team of highly skilled, highly committed individuals who know the territory far better than you do. They work from instinct. They know who the real leaders are, and they don't pay attention to people who just wave their arms and make noise. This was Sam's experience when he learned to lead a team of sled dogs. His first lesson was that the driver of a sled dog team cannot physically control the dogs. 9 dogs deliver thousands of pounds of thrust. You can't force them to go where you want. Your only influence is through relationship, trust, and clear, minimal communication. Too much talking just confuses them. His next lesson came when he had to release the sled. The dogs are harnessed to a pickup truck, barking and howling, absolutely frantic with the desire to run. To start, you have to pull a trigger release. Sam stepped on the runners, grabbed the trigger, and then stepped off. His body knew that the moment he pulled that release, he was no longer in charge. He was surrendering control. He was placing his faith in the dogs, in his teacher, and in the relationship he had painstakingly built with a team. Not by giving them orders, but by feeding them, cleaning their yard, and even clipping their toenails. Simple acts of service. This is the edge of faith that every consultant, every leader must cross. It's the moment we stop trying to drive the change and instead release the energy that's already in the system. Our job isn't to pull the sled, but to create the conditions for the team to run, and then to hang on for the ride, guiding them with a light touch. The trip wasn't smooth. At one point, the rope connecting the dogs to the sled broke, and the team was gone, disappearing into the dark, snowy trail. Panic. But Sam remembered his training. Stay calm. Say as little as possible. He called to the lead dog, Sakani, with whom he had built a relationship. She stopped, and then, together with his teacher, they invented a solution, step by step, in the moment. There was no blame. There was just the problem, the relationship, and the shared commitment to get back to the primary purpose: running. This story beautifully illustrates the shift from focusing on deficiencies to focusing on capacities. A traditional consultant might have analyzed the dogs' weaknesses. Sam learned to trust their strengths. He understood that his role was one of stewardship, choosing service over self-interest. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most crucial, piece of the puzzle. How do you bring this way of thinking and being to an entire organization? How do you move from individual coaching or small team facilitation to large-scale systemic change? Dick and Emily Axelrod call this the engagement paradigm. They contrast it with the old, familiar change management model. The old way works like this. Leadership identifies a problem. They select a cross-functional team of the best and the brightest to study the issue and come up with a solution. This team works for months, in private. Then, they emerge with a grand plan, which they then have to sell to the rest of the organization. They work to get buy-in. And what's the result? The people who were excluded from the process feel that the change is being done to them. They become cynical and resistant. The parallel organization created to manage the change becomes just another layer of bureaucracy, and the implementation fails. The engagement paradigm flips this model on its head. It's based on a simple but radical principle: widen the circle of involvement from the very beginning. Instead of a small team designing for the many, you bring the whole system into the room. This is done through large-scale interactive events, sometimes called conferences, future searches, or summits. You bring together hundreds of people at a time, employees from all levels, customers, suppliers, community members, everyone who has a stake in the outcome. The goal isn't to present them with a finished plan. The goal is to engage them in the same struggle that the leaders have been facing. You create a common database of information, so everyone is working from the same facts. You ask them to look at the past, analyze the present, and, most importantly, envision the future they want to create together. This process is built on democratic principles: open information, public decision-making, and a belief that the wisdom needed to solve the problem is distributed throughout the system, not concentrated at the top. When people know their voice counts, when they connect with each other as human beings, and when they're focused on a positive future, they become engaged. As one participant said, "It may be an ugly baby, but it's our baby." Ownership is created not by selling, but by co-creating. Even the smallest details matter in creating this spirit of engagement. Peter Block writes passionately about caring about place. Think about the last meeting you were in. Was it in a windowless room with rectangular tables arranged in a U-shape, all facing a screen at the front? That room was designed for instruction and persuasion, not for dialogue. The physical space itself sends a message. It reinforces passivity and the belief that the important information comes from the front of the room. What if, instead, the room had round tables, or no tables at all, just chairs and circles? What if the walls were covered not with blank whiteboards, but with art, or with graphic recordings of the conversations as they happened? What if every voice in the room was equally amplified? These aren't trivial details. They're the physical embodiment of the philosophy of engagement. When you change the room, you change the conversation. When you change the conversation, you change the culture. The same is true for how we evaluate our work. We typically hand out evaluation forms at the end of an event. The questions are always about the presenter. Was she well organized? Were the handouts useful? This reinforces the idea that the presenter is responsible for the learning. What if the evaluation questions were about the participants? How engaged and active did you choose to be? How much risk were you willing to take? What change on your part might have given you a different result? Asking these questions shifts the accountability. It sends the message that learning isn't a passive act of receiving information. It's an active, personal responsibility. This brings us back to where we started, the messy, human reality of trying to help. This journey through flawless consulting isn't a straight line, it's a spiral. We start with the illusion of the expert. We face the anxiety of letting go. We learn the power of questions. We navigate the treacherous waters of resistance and emotion. We surrender to the wisdom of the team, and we finally learn to create spaces for true engagement. But even then we will fail, and that perhaps is the final lesson. The book ends with a section titled, "No Masks, No Bargains," which includes stories of consultants' worst nightmares. Amy Katz shares her story of the sexual harassment case, a consultation that felt like a complete disaster. She was out of her depth, she colluded with her client, she lost her professionalism. But in the telling of the story, in her willingness to look at her own failure with honesty, she finds the learning. Her shame becomes a teacher. Her nightmare becomes a source of wisdom. This is the ultimate expression of flawless consulting. It isn't the absence of flaws. It's the courage to face our flaws, to learn from them, and to show up again tomorrow, a little wiser, a little more human, and ready to serve. It's the willingness to be, as the poet said, naked in the dirt, no masks, no bargains. As we come to the end of our journey through the Flawless Consulting Fieldbook, I find myself reflecting on one central, incredibly powerful idea. It's a truth that runs like a quiet river beneath all the stories and all the strategies we've discussed, and it is this: true influence, the kind that creates lasting change, comes not from having power over people, but from creating power with them. This book, on its surface, is for consultants, but its wisdom is far too important to be confined to one profession. This is a book for anyone who has ever tried to lead a team, raise a child, save a marriage, or simply help a friend. It's a guide for anyone who wants to move beyond the frustrating cycle of giving advice that isn't taken and pushing for change that always gets resisted. The world we live in is addicted to answers. We search for the 7 easy steps, the secret formula, the quick fix. We admire the decisive leader, the expert who has it all figured out. Peter Block and his colleagues gently but firmly ask us to let go of that addiction. They suggest that our obsession with answers is actually part of the problem. It keeps us on the surface of life, engaged in a transactional dance of problem and solution, while the deeper human dynamics that are truly driving the situation remain untouched. The path they offer is more challenging, but infinitely more rewarding. It's a path of partnership, of curiosity, and of faith. Faith that the people you're trying to help already have the capacity to solve their own problems. Faith that your role isn't to be a rescuer, but a catalyst, not to provide the map, but to be a companion on the journey of discovery. So, what does this mean for you tomorrow morning? How can you take these ideas out of the realm of philosophy and put them into practice? Let me offer just a few simple experiments. First, the next time someone comes to you with a problem, whether it's a colleague at work or a family member at home, I want you to resist, with all your might, the urge to give them advice. Bite your tongue. Instead, just ask a question. It could be as simple as, "That sounds really tough. What have you already thought about doing?" Or, "What's the real crossroads you feel like you're facing here?" Just watch what happens. You may find that by simply creating a space for them to think, you've helped them more than a dozen solutions ever could. Second, pay attention to the physical world. In your next important conversation, notice the space. Are you sitting across a desk from the other person, like an interviewer? Or are you sitting side by side, looking at the problem together? Are you meeting in a sterile, formal conference room? Or could you go for a walk? A simple change in the physical environment can radically change the quality of the human connection. And finally, embrace your own failures. Think of a recent situation that felt like one of your own consulting nightmares. A project that went wrong. A conversation that ended in frustration. Instead of just trying to forget it, ask yourself, what was the lesson there? What did that experience teach me about myself, about my own need for control, or my own fear of conflict? As this book shows us, our greatest wisdom often comes not from our successes, but from our willingness to learn from our stumbles. That was a summary of the Flawless Consulting Fieldbook and Companion by Peter Block and his colleagues. We've touched on the major themes today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a photograph of a great feast. You can see what's on the table, but you can't taste the food. The real magic of this book is in the stories, the poems, the personal reflections that can't be fully captured here. This summary is designed to give you a taste, to help you decide if this is a meal you want to sit down for. If anything we've talked about has sparked something in you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just an act of learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you show up in the world. A link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It's a simple click for you, but it means the world to us, and it ensures you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep exploring these powerful ideas together.